Good morning, everybody. My name is Stuart Bloom. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this symposium on improving IBD services in the UK, which is a symposium in tribute to the memory of Richard Driscoll. One Saturday last October, it was October the 21st actually, the gastroenterology community in the UK lost one of its brightest stars when our friend and colleague Richard Driscoll died suddenly after a severe myocardial infarction. Many of you in this room will have been affected by his death, having known him or one or more in one or more of his many roles relating to the profession. Even those who did not know him personally will be aware of his huge influence within the specialty and indeed more generally. He served for over 20 years as director and then chief executive of National Association of Crohn's and Colitis, and more recently was chief executive of Crohn's and Colitis UK. After he left Crohn's and Colitis UK, he was a trustee of the British Society of Gastroenterology, chairman of the Health Quality Improvement Partnership, and most recently had a key role as development lead for the UK IBD Registry. It's with great pleasure that my co-chair, David Barker, and I have agreed to chair this symposium, which has been put together largely by Barney Hawthorne as chair of the IBD section. A symposium which has been designed to honour Richard, who was so loved and respected by all who came into contact with him. You will hear this morning several contributions from people eminent in their field, which will highlight the catalytic effect that Richard had in many areas relating to the care of patients with IBD. And I will have something to say a bit later on, specifically about Richard's role in the IBD registry. I'm sure you'll want to welcome me in welcoming members of Richard's family who've travelled from London to be with us this morning. Aviva and Sam, it's a great pleasure to see you here, and we hope you enjoy the session. Before I hand over to my co-chair, David Barker, who will introduce our first speaker and then speak afterwards on how Richard has helped to raise the profile of IBD in the UK, I'll just make a couple of housekeeping announcements. Please put your phones on silent, and also please be aware that the session will be filmed. I think all the speakers have been informed about this. I think now, David, over to you.
So, good morning, everyone. And like Stuart, it's an absolute honour to be here, and very apt that this session this morning is dedicated in the memory of Richard. I just wanted to say before I introduce our first speaker, Barney had a real challenge putting this session together because I know everyone wanted it to reflect the areas that Richard was really passionate and inspired around within IBD. And we would have been here probably all morning, if not all day, looking at all of the different areas. One of them in particular, IBD nursing, which Richard was instrumental in really pushing, and the charity, Crohn's and Colitis UK, is an area that we're continuing to do work. So it would have been impossible to get all of the things that Richard was really passionate and was a real driver in. So we've got a flavour of quality improvement, research. I'm going to speak in a moment about raising the profile of IBD in the UK and the work the charity is currently doing. But I'm going to kick off with introducing Elaine Steven. Elaine is the Health Service Development Manager at Crohn's and Colitis UK, but has worked with Richard for many years, so is really well placed just to kick us off with a brief tribute to Richard.
Good morning, of course, and thank you for inviting me to give a tribute to Richard here today. I think that most of you here will have known Richard well and worked with him on particularly the IBD audit standards and registry. And again, I think a lot of you would have considered him a friend as well as a colleague. Of course, I too am proud to have known him as probably my best and closest friend, personal friend, having known Richard from when I first started volunteering for the charity around about 1992, which gives me a bit of a groan about how old I actually am. And that was actually not long after becoming the charity's first director. And then we've been good friends from then to his recent untimely death last year. That same volunteering career led me a few years later to work really much more closely with Richard during my time as a trustee of what was then NAC and as chairman of the board for 6 years. And I think it was probably those close working years that led us to become not only colleagues but particularly close friends. On the surface, this might appear as an unlikely friendship because I can assure you I certainly don't possess Richard's huge intellect. But we did share the same vision for the charity at that time and could work together in that very collaborative, inclusive way that was Richard's preference and style. But beyond that, and I think this is just the way with these things, on some other level we just connected as individuals. But I'm not here this morning just to tell you that Richard was my friend and our friend, but also to talk of the legacy that he has left us and the people with inflammatory bowel disease and the responsibility that that gives us all to continue that work for everybody affected by inflammatory bowel disease. At the recent memorial held for Richard recently in the Royal College of Physicians, a number of us, and some people here today, of course, talked about Richard's development of NAC, now known as Crohn's Colitis UK, and David Barker was also telling us how Richard had remained a loyal ambassador of the charity and its work. We also heard during that memorial event about Richard's philosophy of keeping patients at the heart of all we do, a philosophy that was so fundamental in all of that work and all of the work that he continued to do. David also told us about how when Richard left the charity and handed over to David, and knowing so many people and being held in such high regard, Richard must have had the most leaving do's and farewell parties in the history of mankind. But of course, this has now been repeated by so many tributes and the sharing of so many stories and the kind words that have been offered to his family. One such tribute, or legacy if you want to call it, is that Crohn's and Colitis UK now offers the Richard Driscoll IBD Research Fellowship, a legacy supporting talent and creating the rising star researchers of the future. We believe, as did Richard, that by developing the careers of future IBD specialists and experts, we will ensure that the progress made in IBD research over a number of years now will be built on and accelerated in the years to come, thus enabling a new generation of outstanding academic clinicians and scientific leaders in the field to work towards achieving the vision that we all share of a world free from Crohn's and colitis. We also heard that day about his enormous contribution, and I think you'll hear later more about that huge contribution and work towards improving standards of care for people with IBD. That journey from the first IBD audit to the development of the IBD nursing role, to the IBD standards and the IBD registry, and work again that we'll hear later that continues and is ongoing to this day. Everyone who talked that day used the same words to describe Richard: kind, articulate, tactful, inclusive, collaborative, a strategic thinker, a clear thinker, a force for good. That awesome intellect was mentioned, as were his people skills, his innate ability to bring people with him, and his vision. Anyone who'd been involved with Richard in the initial IBD audit project, or indeed any other work that any of us were involved with, laughed that day when John Rhodes told the story of going with Richard, Keith Leaper, who sadly is also not with us anymore, and Mike Pearson for that first interview with the Health Foundation, and that Richard had gently but firmly advised that an approach was needed that was clearly holistic, altruistic, and non-assertive. John reckons that he took the hint and spent the interview smiling, nodding gently, but otherwise being completely silent and letting Richard hold forth. But guess what? The grant, that first IBD audit grant, was awarded. Ian Arnott, that same afternoon, gave the example of Richard's input when they were applying for NHS funding for a subsequent round of the IBD audit. And Ian was saying, of course, that the IBD was not on the radar at all of these national audit funders, but that Richard used all of his considerable skills to cajole and persuade them to continue to take part. And Ian said that those skills were so good that by the time they had finished, they probably thought it was their idea. Now, I think that's something that I think anyone who worked with Richard has experienced, this idea that he could talk and then suddenly, oh yes, that's what we're all thinking all along, wasn't it really? Both John and Ian told us, and this is their words, that it is no exaggeration to say that he's done more than anyone else in our generation to improve care for patients in this country with inflammatory bowel disease, and that he oversaw change of a magnitude that had never been seen before and may not be seen again, and did it in a kind, considerate and collaborative manner. And of course, more recently in his HQIP role, he went on to improve patient care much more widely. I have to say, though, that particular afternoon, I nearly laughed out loud when Claire mentioned, wait for it, the few emails and texts starting, "I'm afraid I'm running a bit late." Now, that was the Richard I remembered from my working years. I've had a fair few texts and emails myself. We also heard from his family during the memorial about Richard as a child, boy and a young man, and about him as a husband, father and a grandfather. And of course we heard of, which was of huge personal importance to Richard, the more spiritual aspects of his life. His family shared with us their personal stories, photos and music, as we shared with them his professional achievements and successes, of which they were actually largely unaware. So it's lovely you're here today in Richard's world. I think that day, and I think still now, most of us, or all of us who have worked with Richard, have felt very privileged to be a part of his life and work, and that somehow we have all benefited personally by having known him. Quite what made Richard an ordinary, quite unassuming man, this very special individual, I don't know. But for me, that irreverent little giggle and that sort of look or little twinkle in his eye are what I personally will remember forever. I last talked with Richard the day before his collapse, curiously about the IBD registry in Scotland. And of course, we also caught up, as we did in these sorts of phone calls with each other, with what was happening in our families. Richard was waiting for his grandson to be dropped off as he was looking after him for a day. And our catch-up ended, and I have to say it was an early morning catch-up. Our catch-up ended when Rafi arrived to be given his grandfather's sole care and attention. And I think that's much in the same way that Richard has given all of us who've known and worked with him, his sole care and attention at times. I am so pleased to have had that last conversation with Richard, and although I couldn't see that little twinkle in his eye and that look, I knew it was there, and I believe it still is. So woe betide, wherever he is now, woe betide if it's not a well-organised community or workplace, because I can assure you it will be by now. Thank you very much.